Right now, silver is at $67 a troy ounce. It's December 19th, 2025, and I thought I'd take a look back through this collection of silver coins from around the world from 1916. It's now 109 years ago. And even though at that time in the U.S., silver was not technically monetized the same way gold was, it wasn't legal tender, it was our currency still. You still had silver quarters and half dollars and dimes that were made out of silver. And there still were probably circulating silver dollars, even though none were struck in 1916. And of course, 1916 is a good year for U.S. coins if you're into the numismatic side of things, because they changed from the barber quarters to the standing Liberty quarter. This has got no visible date. That's because it's probably impossible for me to get a 1916 standard Liberty quarter. Those are lots and lots of money. But you can't see the date, so use your imagination. Maybe it is. And also they switched from the barber dimes in 1916 to the mercury dimes. So in this year is a transition year, which is why they made the 2016 gold series of standing Liberty quarter in gold, quarter ounce, mercury dime and a 10th ounce, and the walking Liberty half dollar as a half ounce. This is the first year of the half dollar also that looked like this, but they didn't make a barber half dollar in this year. 15 was the last year for that. Somewhere in here there's some barber dimes. I don't know where those are. As we're digging around, we'll see them. But what I wanted to go over was the exchange rate, because today you can get an idea of how far behind a lot of these other currencies have fallen compared to the US dollar. Forget about silver and gold for a second. I understand, and everyone likes to talk about how much the dollar currency unit has fallen compared to its former equivalent when it was represented by a unit of two of these, or even better, the gold version. And in 1916, the U.S. was striking gold $5 and $10 and $20. And they even struck a $1. It's more of a commemorative, but they struck a $1 gold McKinley coin. And those are actually not that hard to come by. And compared to those, the US dollar now, if you take a US dollar, what's it worth in gold compared to what the actual gold 1/5 of a $5 or McKinley gold content was. And of course, it's lost even more value than if you compare it to 10 of these. But anyway, what about other countries? So some currencies don't exist anymore. Like here we got the big Portugal escudo. That was their currency unit, just like we had a dollar. And take this out. This isn't actually a coin. I believe this is Paraguay, and they did not actually strike any coins of any denomination or material in 1916, just paper money. But this is just a medal from Paraguay. Well, that's not money. But Colombia, of course, was striking coins, and I think not all of them. Some were struck at the Bogota Mint, Colombia, but some of them were also struck in Philadelphia. And as you can see, they put it right on there, 0.9, just like a U.S. And the actual silver content of a Colombia 50 centavo is 0.3617. A U.S. half dollar, 0.3616. So for all intents and purposes, they're the same. So back in the day, Colombia peso was the same as a U.S. dollar, 1 to 1. Today, the exchange rate between the U.S. dollar and the Colombian peso, which is still what they call their currency unit, it's 3,859 Colombian pesos to a U.S. dollar. So they've really let themselves go. Turkey. These nice big coins. This is Turkey 20 kurush, 0.6419. So their actual currency unit was called a piastre, which would have been, I think, 5 of these. But one way or another, this is what we might call a crown coin. It's the biggest silver coin they made for that year, or in general, the 20 kurush. And that would be 0.6419. So it's not quite a dollar silver weight, because a half dollar is 0.36, which is times 2 for a dollar would be 0.723. So it's a little less. But I'll just save you the suspense. Right now it's 42 Turkish lira to 1 US dollar. So at this time, a Turkish piastre, which I think is what you might call 5 of these, or 100 kurush, was a lot more than a dollar. And other examples we got here, unfortunately all the European countries, this is at 2 francs from France. It's more nice Colombia. They all turned into euros, all these 2 francs. Austria, these guys are fighting each other here in World War I at the moment. But interestingly, you can see from this that Austria, Corona, and Hungary, because Austria-Hungary was a unified, this is Hungary, this is Austria, unified kingdom or empire at that time. These are equal. They have the exact same silver content, each one of these, as a French or Swiss franc. And even though Austria was, Germany complained about being chained to a corpse, Austria must have been doing pretty well financially, because these are very easy to come by in incredible uncirculated condition. I have so many of these, and they are, here's a nicer Hungary, very affordable, and that's a clue that the country was financially doing all right at the moment if they were striking a ton of silver coins, and they're easy to get now. There's a Swiss franc in here somewhere. I did just want to point out that, so here's a French 1 franc. It's equivalent in actual silver content. Austria Corona, 0.1342 actual silver content. France 1 franc, 0.1342 actual silver content. And German half mark, they weren't exactly in lines. There's a half mark. Very nice. That's 0.0802. So a whole mark could be 0.16. So a whole mark could be a little more than a whole franc or a whole Austrian Corona, but not by a lot. So you can get an idea then. Now, I know these guys all turned into euros, but it gives you an idea. Or here's Italy. 2 lira. 1 lira is 0.1342. Well, we've heard that before. That's the same as a franc. This happens to be a 2 lira. The 1 lira is a little scarce, actually, for 1916. But that means that the 2 lira has got to be the same as the 2 franc, and it is. So these countries were so intertwined economically, without the euro even, that they made their currencies essentially equivalent. And these wouldn't have been floating all over the place day to day, because for years they were striking these with the same actual silver weight. It does make you wonder, was a unified currency, if they had just stayed making their money out of real money, would they have needed to have a unified currency union with the euro? And all the problems that, this is a Swiss franc. Again, Swiss franc. Switzerland 1 franc, 0.1342. just like everyone else. The Netherlands. They were on the Gilder or Gulden thing, 0.3038. So a Netherlands unit of currency was worth substantially more than, here's one, Queen Wilhelmina. That's 1 Gulden, whatever you call it. So she wasn't matching up with these guys. And but of course they're on the euro now too. Now here's Sweden. Sweden has maintained its independence, you might say, from the euro. There's still Swedish krona today instead of euros. And Sweden, 1 krona, 0.1929. So it's a little bit more than the point, than the things like the Swiss franc, the 0.1342. And it's not exactly easy. It's not like it's 2 francs. It's more like 1 point something, 1.3 or 1.4. But today, so if you compare 1 Swedish krona to a US dollar, .1929, well, a dollar is about 0.7 something. So 0.72 we'll call it. So you need, so it's basically like 3 point something krona to a US dollar. Today it is 9. So that's actually not that big of a disaster for Sweden. So Egypt. Now Egypt, these piastres being struck by Egypt were struck under the British Empire because the British had to occupy Egypt to protect the Suez Canal from the Ottomans, World War I. This is the biggest one they make, the 20 piastres. And you can see they're obviously trying to sort of line up their currency for Egypt with the Ottomans, the big Ottoman 20 kurush. And in Egypt, 20 piastres, 0.7499. Now that's more than a dollar. So in Egypt, 20 piastre is, or was, more than a US dollar. Today, the Egypt pound, it's called, is 47 to a US dollar. So they've let themselves go. Here we got the big Peru, un sol, that's a sol. That's still what they call their currency. So the big Peru sol, not sol like your soul or a Kia Soul, but like SOL, like sun in Spanish. 0.7234. That's basically exactly the same as a, basically the same as a US dollar. And it is 0.95 too. So essentially, it's a US dollar. Well, today, the Peru money is down to 3.37 to a dollar. So, you know, for South America, for actually a lot of countries in the world, Peru's money today has maintained its purchasing power next to the dollar real well. Real well indeed. It's a winner. You got Thailand. And why? Can anyone think of a reason that might be? I'll give you a clue. They struck tons of these nice silver coins. I got a bunch of them in this dish. They're easy to come by from 1916. Because Peru is a country rich in silver. And it still is. And I got a feeling that's got something to do with why their money's still worth quite a bit compared to the dollar today. Now you got the Thai baht. This is a baht. 1 coin, 1 baht. It's the only silver coin struck by Thailand this year. King Ram with a 6 on it. Not too hard to get. I don't think Thailand is known for having a lot of silver. But they must have had other exports. So a Thai baht, 0.434. Also 0.9 silver. Well, that means that it is more than a $0.50. By not a lot, but essentially one whole Thai baht is more than a $0.50. So it's not quite 2 Thai baht to $1 in 1916. It's 1 point something. I'll just make this up. 1.7 Thai baht to a US dollar exchange rate in 1916. Today, that's up to around 31 Thai baht, and that's pretty high. Like if you would have talked to me earlier this year, it was up at 32, 33. So now we're down to 31 Thai baht to $1. That's not a terrible depreciation of the baht compared to the dollar. It's not great. Uruguay. Well, just like Colombia, the Uruguay 50 centavo was exactly equivalent, I believe, to a US 50 cents. Uruguay 50 cents, 0.3617. USA half, 0.3616. I'm sure there's some minimal error in that. So essentially, Uruguay, Colombia, and the United States in 1916 all had their currency basically perfectly aligned. About Mexico, you figure they were a big trade. Now, in 1916, Pancho Villa was being chased around, and he was committing all kind of crimes, and they were sending the National Guard down to the southern border, and General Pershing was chasing him around. Mexico. Mexico 50 centavos, 0.3215. That's not exactly the same as US 50 cents, but it's real close. In other words, because it's a little less silver in it than a US 50 cents, that means that the whole Mexican peso, I don't think they struck pesos in 1916, the whole peso was a little less valuable than a dollar, a little less valuable than a Colombia peso, and a little less valuable than a Uruguay peso. Today, that has made its way up to, how many Mexico? 18 Mexico pesos today to a US dollar. So it has not quite collapsed as much as the Thai baht. That's not great. Not terrible, not great. Portugal, of course, it's a euro now. Nice coin, though. Iran. What's going on with Iran? This is the 5,000 dinar from Iran, 0.666. So I don't know what their currency unit was. It's called. Was it called a real at that time? I think it was, and this is just a portion of a real. But let's just, because I don't know how many dinar are in a real, let's just say that it's 10,000, which I'm not sure about. That would mean that it was stronger than a dollar. And if that's true, all I can tell you is that right now it's 42,100 Iranian rial to a US dollar. So whatever the exchange rate was, it wasn't that bad or anywhere close in 1916 for Iran. So they've had a rough run. How nice this is. It's India. That's a rupee. Well, they still got rupees. And this year, India struck 100 million, a little more than 100 million of these from 2 mints, Calcutta and Bombay. So more than 200 million of these silver rupees got struck just in 1916. And in India, 1 rupee is 0.3438. So as an Indian Hyderabad, 1 rupee, and in India, Kuch, 5 kori is a little heavier at 0.4208. So a rupee is just a little heavier than a 50 cents US dollar. So the exchange rate at the time would have been just a little worse for the rupee. It would have been like a little less than 2. Pardon me. US dollars 0.36, half dollar. So it would have been a low number. Let's say 2.1 or 2.2 Indian rupees to a US dollar. Today, there's 89 Indian rupees to a US dollar. Chile. This is 20 centavos, so you need 5 of these to get a Chile peso. This is the most base metal coin struck in silver of every country in 1916. I don't know what was going on in Chile that year. Basically, it's 0.0434 for one of these. So multiply that by 5, and let's just call that 0.2, I don't know. Let's call it 0.25. Quarter ounce for a whole Chile peso, 5 of these. They didn't strike pesos. This is the biggest one they struck in silver, or any metal. Biggest coin they struck value-wise for 1916. But that means a peso would be 0.25. If a US dollar is closer to 0.72, it means the exchange rate was almost 3 Chile pesos to a US dollar. Today it's 909 Chilean pesos to a US dollar. So just having that little bit of silver in their money went a long way. Now it's just floating down the drain like so many currencies. Who else is floating down the drain? Oh, this is, just show you this. This is Kuch, the India Kuch 5 Kori. This was one of the 2, they call them princely states or independent states inside of India at that time. Hyderabad be the other one. England, well, they still got the British pound, pound sterling. This is real sterling back at this time. I think that ended in 1919, just a few years after this. But this is still sterling. The biggest silver coin they were striking in 1916. They did not strike whole pounds. This is a half or crowns. They didn't strike whole crowns. This is a half crown. And these are very easy to get. Easy to make a nice stack of half crowns. King George, you'll notice, is all over money from around the world this year. This is Canada, though. We'll come back to them. Half crown. So 2 of these is a crown. And I believe 8 of these, or 4 crowns, is a pound. The pound sterling. Well, a British half crown, 0.4205. So if you multiply that by 8, that's more than 3.5 ounces, troy ounces of silver in 1 British pound. Well, that's a lot more than the US dollar, isn't it? That's, well, I'll tell you what, it should be close to 5 US dollars of the time, because a British pound was a British sovereign, and a British sovereign gold coin, which they did strike in 1916, was very close to the equivalent of a US gold $5 coin. So 5 to 1, let's just call it, British pounds to US dollars. Today, British pound is still one of the currencies that is worth more than a US dollar. But that's really dropped a lot. It's $1 gets you 3/4 of a pound sterling today. Not 1/5, but 3/4. So the pound, it's still maintained a lot of its value compared to the dollar. You might say, I mean, it's dropped still from 2/10 to, pardon me, it's dropped from, well, forget it. You get the idea. Right now the dollar's 0.75 pounds sterling. The dollar used to be 0.2 pounds sterling. Canada, 50 cents. It's not the same as a US 50 cents. Canada 50 cents was 0.34. Very close, but not quite a US 50 cents. So the Canada dollar was just a little weaker, just like when I was growing up compared to the US dollar. Today, it's quite a bit weaker. But still, they are pretty close. So that's a relationship that's maintained itself fairly well. So Norway. Norway, even today, just like Sweden and the Swiss franc, maintains its Norway kroner. This is a 2 kroner. So you got to cut this in half to compare it. But Norway 2 kroner is 0.3858, which means 2 kroner. Oh, here's 1 kroner is 0.1929. That's less than a $0.50. And 2 kroner is just a little more than a $0.50. So 1 kroner was just a little more than a quarter of a dollar, actual silver weight, back in the day. And today it's 10 Norway krone to a dollar instead of about 4. So that relationship has gotten weaker, but it's not extreme, as is with some of these other ones. Where's that Cuba? This is a Cuba peso. This is struck in Philadelphia, and Cuba was run by the Americans in 1916, just like the Philippines was. So the U.S. was striking Philippines money. Here's a Cuba 20 centavo, and here's the whole peso. The Cuba peso is 0.7734. It's actually just a little bit more, barely, than a US dollar. Today, the Cuba peso is 24 to a US dollar. So it went from being a little stronger than a dollar when we were running it to now it's 24 Cuba pesos to $1. Straight settlement. That's Singapore and Malaysia. So I'm just going to compare with Malaysia. Maybe isn't fair because Singapore dollar is probably stronger than a Malaysia ringgit. But let's just see. Because I'll just point out that today it's 4.08 Malaysian ringgits to a US dollar. At the time these were struck by England, again, it was called the Straight Settlement Colony. Straight's 20 cent, 0.10. So 5 of these would be, which would be one whole straight settlement dollar, would be 0.5, a little more than 0.5 troy ounce. So at the time, the exchange rate would have been about 1.3, 1.4 straight settlement dollars to a US dollar. Now it is 4.08. It's not bad. It's because perhaps Malaysia also has significant natural resources. I guess I probably won't go through every single country here. You know, some ones we didn't hit were how nice these rupees are. I don't think that's clean. I think that's natural uncirculated. How about Ecuador? We struck them for these. We struck these for them also. Philadelphia. 1 This is 2 sucre. All right, and their currency is still called sucre. See, it says Philadelphia, real small down there at the bottom. Ecuador. 0.14, and this is 2 of them, so it's actually 0.07. That's essentially 10 to 1. 10 decimos de sucre to $1. Well, actually, let me correct myself, because if this is 2 decimos de sucre, I think that means 2/10 of a sucre. And that would mean that a sucre is 5 of these. And 5 of these is essentially a US dollar. So actually, an Ecuador whole sucre, which they didn't strike those, this is the biggest coin they struck, at least this year, that would be real close to $1. So almost 1 to 1. Today, it is 25,000 Ecuador sucre to 1 US dollar. So I guess Ecuador doesn't have oil. How about Japan? This is a half yen. 50 cent, half yen. It's 0.2605 actual silver weight. So 2 of those is 0.52. So 1 yen was about let's call it 1.5. 1.5 yen to $1. Today, that's 157 yen to $1. So they've been playing with their money too much. Real nice coinage. And they did strike a 20 yen gold coin in 1916. Those look great too. I mean, you gotta give the Japanese credit. Great job on the coins. I believe they also struck 10 cents in 1916. I think in our next video I might go through some old newspaper clippings to get some actual prices of actual things from 1916. Oh yeah, it's essentially Kenya. It's not just Kenya, but this is British West Africa. 1 shilling. British West Africa, 1 shilling, 0.1682. They did make 2 shillings also. I don't have any in this dish. I think it's the same. Let's see, is it the same? Yeah, it's the same as a regular Britain shilling. So same deal. A British West Africa pound would have been equal to 5 US dollars. Today, it's 128 Kenyan shillings. They still call it shillings. 128 Kenyan shillings to a US dollar. And maybe you should divide that by, because I think it's 20 shillings to a pound. So if you divide that out, it's still going up a lot, right? You still need 5 or 6 Kenyan pounds to a US dollar, where it used to be you needed 5 US dollars to 1 British West Africa pound. It's Canada. Oh, this is the other princely state I was mentioning, so Hyderabad. So you got the regular India rupees. These are exactly equivalent when it comes to silver content. This is Hyderabad. This is regular India. And I showed you before and already reburied the Kutch princely state. Australia. What do you think about that? So Australia florin, that's terrible condition, isn't it? But You still get kangaroo and the emu. Kangaroo and the emu. Australia shilling 0.1621. 0.1682 is a regular British shilling. So actually they were shorting the Australians a little bit. And this is the biggest silver coin that got struck in Australia that year. The florin, the 2 shillings. No half crowns, no crowns. But today, the Australian dollar, as it became, is down to, I guess I don't have it up here, but you know, it's dropped, and now it's worth less than a US dollar. Because I know silver just hit 100 Australian dollars, didn't it? So it's like 1 point something. It's up there kind of like Canada. How about Russia? I thought there's some Russian coins in here. 20 kopecks, Russia. 5 of these is a ruble. They didn't strike rubles. It's the biggest coin they struck that year. 20 kopek. So 100 kopecks in a ruble. They got some low purity silver too, unfortunately. So Russia, 20 kopecks, 0.0579. So 5 of these, let's call it a little more than a 1/4 ounce Troy silver. Let's call that about 1/3 of a US dollar. So 3 to 1, 3 rubles to $1. Today, that's 80 Russian rubles to a dollar. But, you know, Russia's really been through a lot since 1916. Cut them a little slack. I'm not finding the... Oh, here you go, Philippines. Let's talk about the Philippines. Philippines, 20 centavos, the biggest coin that they struck for 1916. But the peso is the actual currency. There's a lot of years you get a whole nice silver peso. Philippines peso would be 5 of these 20 centavos. These are, of course, struck in San Francisco by the U.S. because we took the Philippines and Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain about 16, 17 years before this, under McKinley. So here is Philippines, 20.09. So 5 of these, little less than a 1/2 ounce Troy. So basically 3/4, I'll call it 2/3 of a US dollar. So 1.5 or something Philippine pesos to a US dollar in 1916. Today, it's 58 Philippine pesos to a US dollar. So today, it's weaker than the baht, for instance, compared to the dollar. French Indochina, 20 cents. Again, this is the biggest denomination they struck in 1916, but the whole currency unit's called a piastre, which would have been 5 of these. French Indochina, 0.29 for a 20 centavo. So 5 of these would get you over a whole troy ounce. So a whole French piastre would be, oh, pardon me. Yeah, 0.29 for 20 centavos. So 5 of these, that's 1.5 troy ounces, pretty much. Actual silver weight for a whole Indochina piastre. And with that in mind, that's basically $2. So 1 piastre was worth $2, or a US dollar was only worth a 1/2 piastre. Today, just give you the example of Vietnam, which is pretty much the biggest country that's left out of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam that made up French Indochina. 26,312 Vietnamese dong to 1 US dollar. Cambodia reals, it's got to be even crazier. Whatever the Laos money is, it's got to be even crazier. You know, none of those currencies are worth much. Oh, It's a good one. Afghanistan. It's Afghanistan, 1916, independent caliphate or sultanate or whatever. Nice mosque here. Afghanistan, I believe it's called a rupee, 0.26. That's the unit. This is 1, so 0.26. So little less than 3 rupees of Afghanistan to 1 US dollar. Today, you're going to need 66 Afghanis, as they're known. It's their currency. 66 Afghanis to 1 US dollar. It's not as bad as Iran. So the point being here that during this time, these currency conversions were not all over the place. They weren't changing every week. You could rely a lot more, even in World War I, in the middle of the war, even as between countries that were fighting each other to the death, like France and Austria and Germany. You know, even though Germany and Austria lost the war, these silver coins made it until I think 1919, a year after the war ended. After that, Germany, of course, went way down the tubes. Austria, I don't think, was striking these after 1918 even, maybe. Certainly not looking like this, because is it Franz Ferdinand? In any event, he died this year. It's the last year where he's on the coins. Italy kept striking nice silver lira coins. But these exchange rates maintained themselves for a lot of these countries. Or even if they did break down because of World War I shortly after this. Like, of course, England had to stop striking sterling after 1919. The U.S. kept it up into the 30s and then gave up. Well, that's not true. The silver, they kept going until 1964, didn't they? The gold, they had to drop. It's Tunisia francs. We didn't cover that. They were controlled by France at the time. Portugal, I don't know when that fell apart. A lot of it did fall apart within the 20s or by the 30s. And there's even some China in here. But up until this point, at least, these rates were very reliable. And a lot of the countries, despite not being part of any, economic union or whatever, or fighting each other, still had exactly comparable currencies, like the 2 francs and the Austrian krona. Thailand had maintained this same weight and purity of a baht since 1860, under King Rama IV. They had to give it up, I think, 1 year or 2 years after this. By 1918, they couldn't keep it up, unfortunately. And this dish, if we include this Paraguay metal, there's more than 2 kilos actual silver weight. And that's after applying a 1.2% discount for wear. So some of these coins are bright, uncirculated, probably full weight. We all saw a few that were not even close. Thanks for watching.